My name is Emma and I have always found solace in tending two gardens. There's something magical about planting a tiny seed and watching it flourish into something beautiful. After my husband passed away, gardening became more than just a job, became my sanctuary, a way to find peace amid the sorrow. At the time, I was hired to care for the garden of Mr. Bennett, a 74-year-old widower. He was a quiet, reserved man who had lived alone for many years after losing his wife. I will never forget the first day I met him. He stood on his porch, gazing out at his overgrown garden, his eyes filled with a quiet sadness. The once vibrant flower beds were now covered in weeds, and the roses his wife had cherished had withered away. This was her paradise, he murmured, almost to himself. His voice carried a deep melancholy that struck a chord within me. I could tell right away that this garden was more than just a piece of land to him. It was a place filled with memories of love and happiness. At first, our conversations were brief. He would nod in acknowledgement as I worked, and I would offer a small smile in return. But as days turned into weeks, I noticed little changes. He would linger on the porch, watching me carefully prune the hedges. His face softened when he spoke of his late wife, and I saw glimpses of the warmth he once had. One afternoon, as I knelt by the flower bed, carefully replanting a set of daisies, he approached me. His cane tapped lightly against the stone path. She loved daisies the most, he said softly. Said they reminded her of sunshine. I looked up at him and smiled. Then, I'll make sure they thrive. Something shifted between us that day. We started talking more, not just about the garden but about life, his memories, my struggles. The way loss never truly leaves but only softens over time. I shared how tending to plants had helped me cope with my own grief, how every flower I nurtured felt like a small step toward healing. One warm afternoon, as I trimmed the roses, he walked toward me with a small wicker basket in his hands. "For you," he said with a gentle smile. Inside were freshly picked apples and a jar of homemade honey. I was touched by the gesture. "Thank you, Mr. Bennett. That's very kind of you," he nodded, his gaze lingering on the garden. "It's beautiful again," he murmured. She would have loved to see it like this. His words meant more to me than he could have known. In restoring his garden, I had helped restore something in him, a connection to the past, a reason to step outside and breathe in the fresh air once more. But what I hadn't expected was how much it would restore me, too. From that day on, he spent more time outside, sitting on the old wooden bench as I worked. We spoke about everything and nothing at all, enjoying the quiet companionship that had become so natural between us. I could see how much he longed for connection, how the silence in his house had become almost unbearable. One evening, as the sun set behind the trees, he sat beside me on the bench, his gaze lost in the hues of the evening sky. "Do you ever miss having someone to share your days with?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. His eyes met mine, filled with an understanding that didn't need words. "Every day," he admitted. There was no awkwardness, no need to elaborate, just a simple truth shared between two people who understood the weight of loss and the comfort of companionship. We continued tending to the garden together, side by side. It became more than just a garden. It was a symbol of resilience, of finding light in the midst of darkness. As the flowers bloomed, so did a quiet sense of hope between us. One particularly chilly morning, I arrived to find Mr. Bennett sitting on the porch, wrapped in an old knitted blanket. "You shouldn't be out in the cold," I told him with concern. He chuckled lightly, waving me off. "I just wanted to see the frost on the petals. It reminds me of the first winter my wife and I spent here. We had just moved in, and she insisted on covering every plant with little cloth wraps to protect them from the cold. I thought she was ridiculous, but in the end, it worked. They all survived the winter beautifully." I smiled at the thought, imagining a younger version of him, standing beside his wife as she carefully tended to the plants. "She sounds like she had a wonderful heart," I said. He nodded, his expression warm with nostalgia. "She did, and I see a bit of that in you, Emma. You bring life to this place in a way I never thought possible again." Those words stayed with me. As the months passed, our friendship grew deeper. We spent more time talking, laughing, and simply enjoying the company of another person who understood the importance of small joys. I made sure the garden stayed beautiful, not just for him, but for the love that had once flourished there. Life is unpredictable. One moment you believe you are on a certain path, and the next, it shifts unexpectedly. But sometimes, in those unexpected turns, you find the most meaningful connections. I never imagined that taking care of a garden would lead me to healing, not just for Mr. Bennett, but for myself as well. And as the days went on, I realized that even in the smallest acts of kindness, there is the power to bring life back to something long forgotten. For both Avus, the garden became more than just a place of memories. It became a place of new beginnings.